So the idea here is to tell us where we are at, first of all, who we are, what we're trying to do, and where we're at with this. And if all goes well, show some of the things as a live demo that's not going to, hopefully burn down in presentation. But yeah, to get started with, really what we have here is I can never quite fit. I think we call ourselves a working group, but we're a subgroup of the Unicode CLDR-TC working group. I think that still makes us a working group. It probably makes us a working group. So the work on this next generation of message format actually started in many places, but a primary place where it started was ECMA 402, which is the part of TC39 that is looking at and handling the INTL object, internationalization, localization in JavaScript. And we're one really primary thing we're trying to end up with is something like INTL.MessageFormat for JavaScript eventually, hopefully. And in order to get there, we're working from the baseline of sorts of MessageFormat 1. It's unnumbered at the moment, but we're referring to the current message format as MessageFormat 1. But we're also very much looking at how the world has changed since then, and what is current, and what do different localization systems and message formatting systems nowadays use, and what they can bring to the table, and also what are the actual requirements and users of message formatting in this day and age. And it's a group with decently wide participation from a number of big organizations and small. Here we have Google and Mozilla and me sort of coming from the OpenJS Foundation to the table. I'm currently though at Mozilla. So hi, I'm Emily.
Hi, I'm ZB.
Hi, Mihai. And we three argue a lot. So, so I'm gonna expect that at one point one of these two is gonna realize that I'm just speaking here, that we haven't really practiced exactly when we're gonna switch to someone else, and they're gonna want to say something.
Yes,
but
yes, but I think the interesting experience of designing a localization system, which I hope part of the reason why you're here is that. Thank you. Part of the reason I hope you're here is because you are interested in the future of localization systems. And the challenge we are facing is that localization inherently is interacting directly with how cultures work. And human cultures and computers don't really go well together. And I think localization is one of the most complicated pieces to think about because compared to most of the other aspects of internationalization, it's primarily non-technical. And a heavy part of the work, which Mihai is helping us contextualize, is working with localization vendors and localizers and resource data points across different types of organizations. So large organization localize software very differently from a little web project. So since the mandate is from TC39 to standardize something in JavaScript, we're facing a really high pile of requirements that are both technical and non-technical, and trying to find a consensus that will satisfy the needs of all the future users.
And as mentioned, we are taking inspiration from a number of different places. And also taking into account a lot of the lessons learned in previous standardization efforts, in particular around XLIF and XLIF 2. And we have many sources of inspiration, shall we say, but there's a lot of ground that we are covering that is also new ground. So this is kind of the entire, it's a view into the scope of what we're really covering. The greeting there at the very top is a message with, in this case, just a simple variable place coming in from some runtime parameter, for instance, or otherwise. And our job, what we want to make really easy and fun, is being able to get that file or resource or whatever it is that is holding that greeting in the first place. And first, turn that into parsed data model. So this is pseudocode, all of it that you're seeing. So it's gonna be different eventually, but still. So we take a file that, or something like a file that has this greeting in it, and we turn it into a representation that's this sequence of pattern elements, literals and variables in this case, that tell us how this should. And from there, we make it possible to format this message by giving it variables and other things as input, and then eventually formatted, in this case as a string, but in other cases formatted as a sequence of parts, or maybe something even more.
And if that sounds relatively easy for you, welcome to the rabbit hole and the rest of this presentation.
So, one of you to talk occasionally for this, because it's just been me.
So MessageFormat 1 is the current Unicode standard for localization, and it provides a basic thinking about localization as one of the formatters. It formats messages. And it extends on it because messages are really complicated and they belong to the application. Well, most of the formatters, most of the time, format uniform data across different applications. So if you format a date, you most of the time will format the date the same way across Windows, Android, Linux, or any other piece of software. But if you're localizing your application messages are unique to your application, and there's so much about tone and the language and the way you communicate this, that it basically brings another level just to the API. And then the resources that you're going to produce, you have to send to vendors, and you work with translators, and you store them, and you iterate over them over the lifecycle of a product. So there are a lot of challenges that are unique to this one formatter of ICU. And in the process of planning of MessageFormat 2, we identify a number of them, which start from extensibility. Human languages are infinitely creative. So trying to encode what grammatical structures may exist and be needed is just not a closed circle of problems. So we would like to be able to extend the system. Selection and variance between messages, different forms of the same message, is a huge space and problem space. Historically, some systems played with nested selectors, which created some glorified version of concatenation, which is one of the problems localization facing. Syntax being error-prone, really hard to express all the way you can create a message without at some point hitting a problem of how do you encode the encoding. And building better interactions with computer-aided translation tools, because we would like translators not to have to be software engineers. And then the reality of today is that most of software is actually really complicated and very contextual. And we like to think that software today, even the traditional user interfaces, are communicating with users in much more sentence form. Like, you don't see user interfaces anymore that are traditional, like file open type of interfaces. You rather see, Mary and John like 5 of your photos from last 3 months. And now if you try to imagine this sentence, it operates on many formatters. It uses genders and declension and other grammatical features per language. So expressing this kind of spoken language or close to spoken language in a way that is natural in all languages of the planet is insanely challenging. And the the bullet point of CAT, so CAT tools, and formatting markup in rich user interfaces is the one that we are currently hitting. And then the last point is that we would like to be able to help the tooling with some semantic metadata that would allow the tools to help the translators reason about how this sentence or this message is going to be shown on the screen, or spoken by a voice assistant, or in the future presented in some virtual reality. All those novel ways of interacting with computers will have to eventually be adapted to localization, and we are trying to predict and prepare for that challenge. The biggest customer of what we're doing is web localization, because the mandate comes from the ECMA 402. And the web is a particular ecosystem that is a little bit different from traditional software ecosystems. Among them is that the way we think about stability in localization has always been very serious, because you accumulate resources. If your company is using some localization system, even the one that you design inside your organization, any change means that you have a backlog of resources that have been encoded in the previous system that would need to be updated. But with the web, we are hitting one more level of backward compatibility, which is that the web does not allow you to deprecate anything. If you put an API on the web, it's there forever. And the expectation is that 50 years from now, web browsers will be able to open the website from 1990. So if a website will start using any of the APIs we're doing, you cannot ever take it away. So designing MessageFormat 2 in a way that will be catering to the needs of the web and standards is really an audacious task, and we are consistently humbled by how many constraints we are trying to fit at the same time. And then, of course, the rich web components, HTML, Django, React, Vue, and other latest frameworks that are used we have to think about how to localize them, not just pure JavaScript. The final interesting concept is that on the web, everything is treated as insecure. So there's a little bit different constraint when you start thinking about your localization files as coming over the wire and possibly intercepted by men in the middle. And now the question is how much damage those resources can do or should be able to do. So as we are increasing the richness of the user interfaces and the localization, we are starting to get close to the point where we could allow localization resources to steal your data, and of course we would not like to allow for that. So there are some considerations for the insecure, treating localization resources as insecure. And as we mentioned before, GUI toolkits, speech assistants, future emerging technologies, heavily resource-constrained localization places where we can display the same message on your watch and on your phone and on your 65-inch TV, but is it really the same message? What should happen with it? And how should it be pronounced by the voice assistant in your language is a class of challenges. Mihai, do you want to take over the design goals?
You can see the bullets already what we want to do, but basically we want to support grammatical features like plurals, genders, and especially inflections, which traditionally are not handled by any current format that I know, at least not in the open, right? I mean, we all know that Google and Apple and Amazon, we all have some kind of assistants that try to be very human-like and do the right thing, but there's nothing in the open that can help you with that. The second one is, variance in translation. It's a little bit what Zibi touched when you say that the same message should be on your watch and on the big TV. Personally, I come also from a little bit, I add to this mess a little bit more, because I'm not trying to look just at the web. I would say, no, you should be able to use this format
on a Windows native application and a macOS native application and embed it in your getText PO file if that's what you feel like doing, because you have an old application that would be too much of a mess to migrate. So I would like to see that too. And already there are mechanisms in a lot of platforms that allow you to do some variance, right? For instance, in Android, you can say at runtime you detect if the device is landscape or portrait, and you get a slightly different message, or it's a phone versus a tablet, or all kind of things like that. Express formatable data, such as number, dates, currencies, and units. This is something that most formats do today, and MessageFormat 1 does it already, and Fluent and others. What I think is kind of missing there is that, at least if you look at MessageFormat 1, there's no good way to add new formatters, right? ICU added units formatting and list formatters, but you cannot do that in MessageFormat itself, right? It's like relative times, date intervals, anything like that. You have formatters, but if you want to put it in a message, then you take it, you format it outside, and you pass the result to the message format, and then it's good. Represent structured data, such as markup, comments, and metadata. Yes, that is actually a pretty big one. It sounds like it's web only, but devices like phones and everything else, you still have some formatting there, right? The UIs, the traditional UIs are also getting richer in formatting. And that was a challenge usually, because most of the time it's just, let's dump some HTML tags in the middle of the message and we'll see. And then you end up with double escaping, and you see stuff like at runtime you see ampersand EMP semicolon because somebody messed up the encoding and whatnot.
And then you can embed a script, as well as JavaScript.
Right.
Steals your data.
Yeah, so be capable of round-trip, localization round-trip. I'm not sure what that meant.
I think this is about the cat tool and back.
Oh, cat tool and back, yeah. That's, of course, one of the bottlenecks, I think. Maybe it's a personal opinion, but a lot of the current formats have been designed by developers with developers in mind. And they are not necessarily friendly with localization tools. I don't want to generalize, but if you look at ICU MessageFormat, it's still not well supported by any decent, any commercial localization tool. Trados and, you have proprietary tools usually. Yeah, Google has one. I'm pretty sure a lot of other companies have one. I know Netflix has something. But Fluent, it's a little bit the same, right? There's a localization tool from Mozilla, by Mozilla, that you can localize Fluent, but I cannot take it in Trados, which is an off-the-shelf, very popular localization tool. So we would like to have a standard way to take our format and go through the whole localization pipeline and get it back. And you see some push towards standardization in this area. Right now, if you develop anything with Xcode on iOS, you can right-click and say, export this as Xlif. And then export the Xlifs back. So we would like that, of course. Enable the creation of implementation frameworks and tools, building on top of the standard. Yeah, I'm not sure what is the next one.
Guess, be surprised.
Deliverables, yes. Okay, yeah. The first bullet here, it's a canonical data model, which I think this makes it a little bit different from other standards that I'm aware of. That was a long debate to the point of arguing at some point. But in the end, the main deliverable, it's a data model. It's a representation of your messages as syntax and format independent. Right? So I should be able to load MessageFormat 1 files and parse them and get up with this in-memory representation, and they will look the same and render the same as if the original source was Fluent, right? Or something like that. So think of it, if you have to design something like Photoshop, right? You'd write the core data model is like a certain number of colors and planes and transparency and pixels, and you have a model in memory, and then you write plugins, import-export plugins that know about PNG and animated GIFs and whatnot. So this is the idea, right? We'll have a core representation, and then you can write parsers for all kinds of syntax. But of course, we want a canonical syntax too. That would be bullet number 2, because you cannot say this is ECMAScript, a data model, but we give you no syntax, right? So it's going to be a first syntax, the canonical one, is going to be very much JavaScript, HTML, web friendly. But it doesn't prevent us from having other syntaxes that they don't look like that. But having in-memory representation that is universal, in theory, you should be able to load that format and save it as message, whatever. Take a MessageFormat 1 syntax, load it, and save it as canonical syntax. Or
and all the tools will work with data model.
yeah, and all the tooling is going to work with the data model, right? I should be able to load something and do validation and linting and extract terminology and grammar checking, and everything else would be file format independent. I see some people kind of shaking heads. I know it's a tough problem. That's why we are not there after 2 years, close to 2 years.
One pandemic.
Yeah, and pandemic, which, yes, this was not friendly. Yeah, we're going to have a one-to-one mapping between the model and XLIF. So we'll have a standard way to export to XLIF. Specification for resolving translation at runtime, including interpolation and types and runtime errors. Yeah, that's a tricky one again. It's also coming from the web, the fact that you have no guarantees that all messages are available necessarily, which in traditional applications was sometimes the case. Although it's not, right? You have all kinds of tricks in desktop applications too, right? There's a feature that is secret and they don't want people to know about it, so it's not in the official version control, and you shouldn't see the French translations for it. So there are all kinds of tricks there, right? So you don't turn it on until we make it public, and there are trick areas in there too.
And there's also the matter of wanting, because we're defining a data model that can support a number of different sources, then we want to also be able to define this is what you're supposed to do with the data model when you want to format it. So that the runtime written in Rust, and the runtime written in C++, and the runtime written in JavaScript all do kind of the same thing with the same representation of the data model representation of the messages.
Yep. And of course, we would like a test suite that's going to be able to parse and format messages. We're going to try to make that suite as platform independent and programming language independent. So as much as we can, data driven. So I don't know what's the format, but imagine, I don't know, YAML or JSON, you should be able to say, no, I want to implement this whole thing in Go, and this is the test suite that is data only and is data driven. So you write a bit of code to put up the test suite, but now you know you're compliant. Current status. Somebody else?
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's roughly been a presentation of where we started from. It took us, on the other hand, quite a long time to figure out where we were actually to start with. So figuring out all of these questions that we do need answered and focusing on what are the shapes of the answers that we want to give was a significant amount of work. But further than that, we have indeed managed to reach some consensus on the shape of exactly how we are solving some of these problems that we have identified for ourselves. And a lot of this starts from, first of all, accepting that we're going to have message references. So one message can refer to another message. And this allows encapsulation of sorts. It allows dangerous tools for developers in some instances where you can create bad situations. But on the other hand, it is effectively it becomes a requirement for some of the other consensus that we've reached. In particular, the current, I think, topic that we're most discussing is the influence of the third bullet point of allowing selectors to depend on the value of one or more input arguments, so that we can have a system where previously, when you have a really complex message and it includes if this then that sort of structures in them, you needed to nest these. But because we're allowing the selectors at the top level only, but also allowing those selectors to then depend on more than one input, we've kind of figured out, we've reached an interesting, how do you do a switch based on multiple values while allowing each of those values to actually have fallback values? And we have not been able to find prior art in the literature for this yet. There might be something, but it's challenging.
And something I want to point out here is that it may sound like an auxiliary problem, but actually in our work, one of the bigger revelations was that understanding how selectors work with fallbacks in cases when something doesn't fit perfectly, and accepting that things will not fit perfectly, and we should be able to recover, and we should have algorithms and logic and specification that tells what happens when not a perfect match is available, has been crucial to our ability to move forward. And the message references were also crucial to recognize, because for the longest time we were struggling with the implications of how people can abuse them. So accepting that people will abuse them, it's just that if we don't allow for it, people will abuse them worse, was maybe gives you a glimpse into the nature of problems we are facing in our.
Thank you. I have 2 points regarding this. One is prior art. It's something I just thought about last night, late, so it's not. I think this is in a way similar to local identifier matching. If you look at BCP 47, where you can say stuff like Serbian star RS, right? So it's a bit of a decision on language script region. It's a tuple of 3 elements, and the star would be a default if you don't find it. It's not exactly what we do, but it's a little bit of art if you want to look at it that way. The other one that we had a lot of comments in time was about message references and if it's dangerous or not. And yes, we agree it's dangerous. But the trouble is you can't prevent that, right? So if you don't give me that natively in the format, what I'm going to do as a developer, I think I need it. I'm going to load that message, format it, and pass it as a parameter to the main message, right? So I'm going to build it from pieces. At least like that, we give you an easy way to do it, but now it's visible, right? A linter can detect that and can advise you what to do about it, right? So you don't do it behind the back of the framework. Now it's on the table. That's the official way to do it. We don't recommend, but that's the way. Thank you.
And further than these consent C, because I've got the mic, we are also working on future progress. In fact, this slide is now outdated, given that I think it was day before yesterday we managed to merge a PR into our spec on the exact shape, in fact, of the message data model. There's structures around that are still being worked on. And we are also discussing currently, we have many discussions currently ongoing. One of them is how exactly do we want to ensure that the security and privacy implications are taken into account, that we don't open potential security holes for implementation that want to be compatible. More widely, we're talking about ensure that extensibility, that there's a right amount of extensibility so that you can extend it so that you can, do whatever you need to do with it, but not so much that everyone's going to extend it and make everyone's implementations incompatible with everybody else's, because that would be less nice. And then also we're talking a bit more vaguely still, about how exactly do we ensure that it is possible to incorporate MessageFormat 2 with use cases where it's complex structures and not imperative sort of formatting that is happening with the messages that you've got. There's, in other words, quite a bit of work still ongoing, but also I think we're starting to, at the very least, get a decent idea of what the map looks like. That was maybe intended, but yeah. ZB and I threw this up as a schedule thing, I think, yesterday. So not making any promises here of any of these things being reached at any of our schedule, but we're, you know, optimistic. In other words, the amount of work here that's left before we have a specification is in some number of months to some very low number of years. So I could get more specific than that, but that would be precise rather than accurate. Let's see if this works.
Live enough.
It is live. Yeah. See. So what I'm showing you here is that we can already, because we've been developing a lot of the models and playthings. Sorry, hand at the back. Okay. So as mentioned, what we can do already, because we've been developing a lot of code in order to implement and develop our own thinking about how this message formatting ought to happen, we can even now take in, for instance, MessageFormat 1 source and parse it from the source into a data model. This is, again, effectively think of this as pseudocode representation of the data model that then goes through a formatting structure, formatting runtime, and gives you an output string in this case. And of course, because it's MessageFormat 1, so you can do all sorts of things. And the point here is that what we're hoping with the data model is to build a structure that doesn't just build a new reality, but it's a structure that you can start incorporating into whatever existing systems you've already got. And it's not, of course, just MessageFormat 1. Whoa. Okay. Bother. So that. No. This was me not. I didn't check my Bible transpiling target config right, and I was just optimizing for the latest Firefox and not the latest Chrome. Sorry. Going back to the MessageFormat 1 example, or a variant thereof. This is doing a plural selector, and there you can. We have. So. We have an idea of what the whole message structure is going to look like, but we're still working on the exact details of that, and I hope this works. Yeah, we're of course also working on at least some idea of an XLIF2 representation of these messages, so that we can get that whole toolchain to work, and possibly even provide toolchains for getting better localization system integration for existing MessageFormat 1 systems. Because so what's happening here, for instance, is that internal selectors are going to get upgraded into, so nested selectors are going to be unnested, and other complicated things like that. Sorry? Is that namespace real? No. They're not really yet, but there should be indicative thereof. But I figure, yeah, and yeah. The real namespace has to be allocated by the XLIF standard point. Yeah. But this is effectively, I think, where we're at now, and indeed, we are hoping to have some conversations between the working group while we're, physically some of us live here, that we might be able to advance things even further and reach more consensus on things and questions and matters. And what questions might you have, if any?
Is one of the goals of the message format to actually support cases like Siri or Assistant?
So the question is whether we support Siri and other such similar systems. And to some extent, yeah. But this again goes into the space making sure that the system is sufficiently extensible. So the structures that are complex vocal system like Siri needs or might need in the future are probably going to be systems that a small startup also working in formatting their messages would find cumbersome to need to interact with continuously. So we need to serve a whole huge range of clients, which does include Siri and other such systems, but not exclusively them.
Oh boy. Hypothetical question, right? I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I wish that the answer was just join us and help us finish this. I think the fact that I really don't know if there is a good answer right now, and that's indicative of like how significant this work is. You can safely use MessageFormat 1, and if it supplies your needs, then we will have an upgrade path for you that will be no, I would say it's going to be pretty painless. If you hit limitations of the system and you want to work around them, I really don't know what to recommend to you at this point. I'm so sorry. I feel like it's the way I think about this is that localization is insanely complicated problem, and for that reason, no sane people touch it and try to solve it. Which means that the momentum to do something about this happens every 10 to 20 years at the velocity that actually allows to make an impact on the industry. And the fact that we have access right now to the most popular programming language in the world, which is JavaScript, that is 90% populated with amateur-driven software, is incredible. Because on one hand, we have to supply the needs of YouTube and Google Docs and Facebook, and on the other hand, the long tail is really long. and those are people who just have like the weekend to create their website, and we want them to be able to localize their. It's amazing that we have a chance to do this. I don't know how many chances we will have in the next 10 to 15 years, except of this one. So it's a generational problem, and for that reason, asking for is there a solution from 2 years ago that you can use today is unlikely to yield a lot of results. If you really need to update, I would probably recommend MessageFormat 1 for what you can use, and really document the use cases that you're missing, and come to us, share them with us, and help make sure that you don't stay with this question 2 years or 3 years from now. I would say that's probably the closest answers I can give.
Zibi's a pessimist, possibly realist. I'm more from the other end of things. It's gonna be fine. So fundamentally, the work we're doing here is making it much more clear and identifying the reality that the data in human messages, in any way that you want to express them, is actually really quite simple. That, like the demo I showed you, whatever system, for instance, that your messages can be interpreted in, they can be transformed to other formats, other data models, other structures, or, well, the data model, because none of the others seem to have an actual data model, at least publicly available. And this means that whatever system you've got, pick one that actually works not just with your developers, but your localizers as well. And when, not if, but when we have a better tool chain to provide, we should be able to also either provide directly or have you be able to relatively easily develop a tool chain for getting your own messages, for integrating all of this into your own systems. But we're not quite there yet.
Yes.
Yes, we are expecting to put this into ICU4X for those, you know.
And to add more, because it's going to be a Unicode standard in ICU4X and 402, and it's going to be in the old ICU for C and for Java, right? You cannot say we are the standard internationalization library ICU and we don't support this.
The question is whether we're porting MessageFormat 1 as well, and the answer to that is no. MessageFormat 2 is a really quite entirely different beast than MessageFormat 1.
I think the question was if ICU4X plans to support MessageFormat 1. Right.
Well, we will format as we showed in the demo, we are going to support your MessageFormat 1 messages. You can load them in ICU4X. The engine that is going to do this is going to be a MessageFormat 2 engine. Some of the complexity we're facing every day, leaking on the stage right now. It's also not incidental that the three people on the stage represent three pretty complex languages of the planet.
Hi, I speak Finnish.
Other No. Yeah, you will have like your little piece of code that is just producing the data model of MessageFormat 2, and from there you're in a MessageFormat 2 world, and you're happy, and there's blue sky. And see, I'm an optimist too. So that really depends on your use case. I would say Fluent is a really good system for the web. I would say it's probably the best one if your product is an HTML website or React. I think it has the highest number of features. It's less specified than MessageFormat 1. I would observe like what kind of other infrastructure you're interacting, like vendors. Mozilla was able to convince some vendors to support Fluent, but not a lot. So you don't want to end up with putting Fluent into your system and then going to localization vendors who will say, we don't support Fluent, right? So it's, I really wish we were a year from now when you're asking this question. I
as one of the authors of Fluent, I think it's a really good system, and I'm one of the impressive things is that we've been using it for 3 years now in a major product, and the number of oh my god, we made a huge mistake lessons learned is not that high, which is good. I would say if you're looking for features that MessageFormat 1 does not naturally provide, like rich HTML bindings, for example, then probably Fluent would be the second best choice, or on par with MessageFormat 1. And I would say the trade-offs are depending on constraints and requirements of your system. Both of them are deeply imperfect, which is why this is happening. So I struggle to give a general response without like completely understanding the system constraints, and that may also tell you about my tech lead role in my organization, which is that this is how I answer most questions. Any more questions? Yes. Ooh.
The question was anything we have for user experience, right? So guys that it's arguing most about that. Try to, even what the translator is, it's open for interpretation, right? If you are a small open source project, your translator is probably a developer, right? No professional donate his own time that would normally do that for money, right? It's a plumber offering to fix your pipes for free because he's professional. At the other side of the spectrum, you have people that they pay their bills and they are paid by hour. How many hours they translate? So one of the things I try to convey is that yes, the huge spectrum, and at one end of the spectrum you have translators that are almost like developers. As a developer, you don't write software in Notepad, right? You have an IDE that helps you with syntax highlighting and refactoring and whatnot. Those are the CAT tools that translators use. Anything in a low level. But for that, I think Xlif is not enough. I mean, yes, the interface is going to be through Xlif, but you cannot just say, we add an extension to Xlif, and Xlif it's an entry point, but CAT tools, they are a bit like the internet. It's a collection of pipes, right? So the fact that you change in the Xlif it's an entry point, the fact that you squeeze the Xlif and you change the shape doesn't mean your messages are not going to be somewhere in the pipe, right? So you don't want to break UI, you don't want to break leveraging, you don't want to break validation. There are tons of things in the pipe that can break. So we are paying attention to it, and ideally a translator translating this format and this syntax
At this point, we're at time, and I do want to be respectful of our next presenters and so on. But I will
Let's
please join me in thanking these fine individuals for braving doing a presentation like this, and I'm sure they'd be happy to discuss things with you individually once they've left the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much.